Let's talk about some of the Hinterkaifeck Murders case pictures. Various websites have different pictures, but some of them have different identifications for different people in those photos. For example, this photo right here says the Gruber family. Cecilia Gruber, 72, stands second from left. That makes sense. That looks like a 72-year-old woman. So that probably correct. If that's Cecilia Gruber, then that's her. I mean, she looks like an older 72-year-old woman. Next to her is likely the family's first maid, Krasin Reiger. So they're not sure who this is, but they think it's the maid who was the maid prior to the murders who left before Maria Baumgartner then came to be the new maid. To her right, Cecilia's daughter, Victoria Gabriel, 35, holds baby Joseph. And that makes sense because Joseph was about 2.5 when they were murdered. So in this picture, I don't know when it was taken, but let's say it was taken around the time he was 2 years old. The young man at far left is unidentified. And that's the right thing to say if you're not sure who's in the picture, to just say you don't know who they are. So if this is correct, this is Cecilia, her daughter Victoria, her grandson Joseph, their previous maid, and we don't know who this is. Could it be Cecilia's son? I believe she had a son from her previous marriage, which would have been Victoria's half-brother who died in World War I. Could this picture have been taken before he was killed in World War I? Or could this be just a farm hand, somebody who worked on the farm, or another family member, a cousin or a nephew of Cecilia, something like that? Or could the maid, this be her son, but he looks too old to be her son, so could this be the maid's husband? She left work there when she had a baby. Could this be her husband visiting her at work or something like that? But I assume it's possibly a family member, but I don't know who it is. And so they say it's unidentified. And then in this picture taken, we don't know when, but it says Victoria Gabriel and Andreas Gruber. So this would mean that Victoria was younger in this photo because obviously she looks way different than here. The picture to me doesn't look like a female, but it's labeled as her, so apparently somebody knows or thinks that this is Victoria when she was younger, maybe a teenager, a kid, and she just, because it's an old picture and it's black and white, and she has her hair balled up behind her head, and it was taken far away. We just can't get a good close-up, but they say this is Victoria Gabriel. But I don't know what age she was here. And maybe, this is how she dressed, living on a farm, just working on a farm. I don't know. And she also appears to be holding something in her hand, but I'm not sure what that is. It looks like maybe it's not. But anyway, they identified this as her father, Andreas Gruber. So that looks like him. He was 63 at the time of his death. I don't know how old he would be here in this picture, but if Victoria was younger, and this is Victoria, then he would have been younger. So in his 40s or 50s at the time of this picture. So then we go here to this picture. And this website identifies this picture as the Hinterkaifeck murder victims from left to right: Andreas Gruber, Cecilia Gruber, Victoria Gabriel, Cecilia Gabriel, Joseph Gabriel, and Maria Baumgartner. Okay, so I guess you can figure out what's already wrong with this picture. This identifies this as Andreas Gruber, but up here it says he's unidentified. And if this picture was taken not long before the murders, Andreas would be older. Look how old he looks in this picture that was apparently taken years before they were murdered. This is not the same person. So this picture rightly didn't identify this person, but then down here it says that the same picture, the same person, and I believe this picture comes from the same photo, this and this, they identify as Andreas Gruber. That is not Andreas Gruber. I don't know who it is, but that is not Andreas. Unless this picture is really old and it's taken when Andreas was much younger, and this isn't Victoria and Joseph, this is some other family member with their kid. We don't know when this picture was taken, but if this is Victoria and Joseph, then it had to be taken not long before their murder. If this is somebody else, as if this isn't Victoria and Joseph, we don't know who's in this picture or when it was taken. But behind them does look like the Hinterkaifeck farm. Okay, and then for this picture, they identify as Cecilia Gruber. The woman appears to be looking downward and wearing a white scarf over her head. So it's different than this picture, but maybe it's taken on the same day, around the same time, but it's like a different outfit too. So they identify this as Cecilia. It could be just this picture was taken on a different day than this picture, and she's wearing a different outfit. Okay, and they identify this picture as Victoria Gabriel. This is the same picture as this, so if this is Victoria, then this would be Victoria too, so that could be correct. They identify this picture as Cecilia Gabriel, or Celia, the 7-year-old child. I assume this to be correct. She's not in the photo above. Maybe she was at school at the time this picture was taken or whatever, but this, I would say, is Cecilia. This is Joseph. This is the same picture as this. So if this is Joseph in this picture, then this is also Joseph. This picture they identify as Maria Baumgartner, but up here they identify this picture as Cecilia Gruber, 72. Here they identify it as Maria Baumgartner. Now, Maria Baumgartner was 45 when she was murdered at the farm, and we know that she walked with a limp due to a defect or disability she had in her foot or leg. Possible this is a 45-year-old woman who worked, hard-working woman, but, I don't know. But if this is Maria Baumgartner, then this is also Maria Baumgartner. If this is Cecilia Gruber, then this would be Cecilia Gruber also. Or maybe it's completely somebody different. And also, if this is more likely Cecilia Gruber, because she looks like she could be 72, but also because if the maid Maria Baumgartner just arrived the same day she was murdered, in other words, she arrived during the day and then that night or overnight she was murdered, this couldn't have been taken that day, I don't believe, because they're not dressed for the weather then. I believe it was snowing, and this doesn't look like there's snow on the ground or too much snow. Maybe there is a little light dusting. It's black and white and I can't see or tell. But there's not a lot of snow on the ground. If there is a little dusting of snow on the ground or whatever, I don't believe there is in this picture. You can see for yourself. My eyesight's just not that good. But also, they're not dressed with coats or anything, so it can't be that cold. And when the new maid arrived, do they just automatically take a picture? So, like, this is the old maid and this is the new maid. Why would the old maid come back to the farm for the arrival of the new maid? See, that makes no sense. So, my best guess is that this is not Maria Baumgartner, the maid who was murdered. This is either the mother or somebody totally different. This is not the maid that got killed. So, in this picture, they say that this is possibly the previous maid, Krasin's Reiger. So that could very well be Krasin's Reiger. Or maybe it's not the maid, the previous maid. Maybe this was just a family picture. Maybe this is Cecilia, Victoria, Joseph. Maybe this is Cecilia Gruber's daughter from her previous marriage, who I believe lived into adulthood and survived after the family was murdered. Did she come for a visit prior to the murders happening? Because they kind of look alike. Were they sisters? Was this her half-sister? Was this Victoria's older half-sister from Cecilia's previous marriage? Could this have been the son who got killed in World War One. I believe Cecilia had a son from her first marriage who got killed in World War One, just like Victoria's husband was killed in World War One. I don't know, but I don't think this is Andreas if this picture was taken just prior to the murders, because if this is Victoria and Joseph, Andreas would not look like this. He would be older in this picture. So to recap, I think this is probably Cecilia Gruber, 72, Victoria and Joseph, possibly the maid, or maybe just another relative who came to visit, possibly the daughter of Cecilia and her first husband. Possibly this is possibly the son of Cecilia and her first husband, if he was still living at this time the picture was taken. But this picture right here is definitely, in my best guess, not Maria Baumgartner, the maid who got killed. Okay, here's a mattock used in the Hinterkaifeck murders. Now, I don't know if this is the actual weapon that they took a picture of. It looks different than the replica pictures I saw earlier, because the replica picture was missing one side. In other words, it's just one-sided and it had screws. And I don't see the screws in this picture, so who knows where this picture came from. But it is a picture of a mattock, just some, kind of farm tool that they believe was used in the murders. I don't know if this is an actual picture of the actual one they found there, or if this is just another replica picture, or what. This doesn't, I don't see the screws in this picture, and it's not one-sided like previous pictures I've seen, but maybe this is, they also found a pickaxe. Maybe this is the pickaxe that they found. I don't know. So I'm not sure about that picture. This is Lorenz Schlittenbauer, and I believe this is correct because I've seen it multiple times, and it's always identified as Lorenz Schlittenbauer. So I believe that is indeed the neighbor who discovered the bodies along with two other people. And he was at one time Victoria's lover and the possible father of her 2.5-year-old son, Joseph. Okay, and this is a crime scene photo. This is accurate. This is actually a crime scene photo. The label on this photo is Andreas Gruber and his granddaughter Cecilia. Okay, I believe that is Andreas on the left. I'm not sure if that's Cecilia, the 7-year-old on the right. It looks like an older person, possibly Victoria, but it's labeled as his granddaughter Cecilia. So unless this is a mistake and they actually meant to say daughter Cecilia, well, no, the daughter is Victoria. So, she looks too young to be his wife, Cecilia, too old to be his granddaughter, Cecilia. So I'm thinking more that it's Victoria, but it just could be the picture, the way the picture is. It just looks like this is a taller, older adult person rather than a 7-year-old. And so I don't know, but. And remember, the Lorenz Schlittenbauer moved the bodies. So, and apparently he removed Andreas Gruber's body, and he moved the granddaughter Cecilia's body. So if this picture was taken, of course, after they were moved, he said he had moved them. So this possibly is correct. It's just that this body on the right doesn't look like a 7-year-old to me. But okay, this is Maria Baumgartner's room. This is the maid's room. I'm pretty sure this is accurate. This is the maid's room. It's also a room for storage. That's why there's stuff here, But this is the maid's body right here. And this is the bed she would have been sleeping in. So window here. It's a door to the right here. And I believe that's a calendar right there. Carl Gabriel, I have no reason to know that this is incorrect. I believe this is indeed Carl Gabriel's photo. He served in World War I, and he was the husband of Victoria Gabriel. And this is a picture of the memorial that I believe still stands to this day, the Hinterkaifeck Murders Memorial. So these pictures are correct down here at the bottom. It's just some of these are mislabeled with the wrong people. It doesn't really matter, I guess, when you're just trying to, guess who committed this crime. But, I just noticed that some of the pictures are labeled wrong, and other websites have even different things. One of the previous websites I looked at said this is 13-year-old Victoria, and this is her father, and he would have been about 43 at the time. He looks much older, but, some men age quicker, some people age quicker, so he could be 43 here, but I just don't know. I believe in criminal profiler Pat Brown's video. She even says to just check all these pictures because they're not, a lot of them aren't correct or they don't make sense. And now I know what she's talking about because a lot of the labeling of the pictures doesn't make sense as far as the people in the pictures and some of the supposed murder weapons in the case. Okay, here are some more pictures involved in this case. This is a picture from 2queenstruecrime.wordpress.com, the Hinterkaifeck Murders Part 2. I would just want to give credit where credit's due. This is Giles Corey Hinterkaifeck. Anyway, this is just to give a better look at the actual farmhouse and the setup of it. Over here, this building is not attached, but this is a tool and equipment shed. Right here that says tool equipment store. It's where they store tools and equipment. Okay, this is the farmhouse. This is the front door. Right here is the front door. There's 2 windows on each side. And then here's the stall. They have it labeled barn here. They call it a stall, where the stalls were. And this is another part of the barn. There's also a machine room, I believe, is back here. But the Witch's Woods gate, this is the gate of the barn doors. I believe this is where they opened and went in there to find the bodies. I believe this is what was left open at one time when the mechanic was working on the machine on the other side. And then the dog ended up being tied up front, but it was like in the barn or something. The barn door is open. So this is just another look at the structure to give you an idea of the setup. This is their coffins. Of course, the baby, the little one for the 7-year-old, then the adults. They have lots of pictures online, but you got to make sure that they're accurate, some of them. It's another picture we've already seen, but one of my other parts about this case. But see, to me, these look like 3 men, but a lot of the labels have this labeled as Victoria when she was younger, and that she was wearing her father's slippers or something like that. So I believe this to be Andreas. I just don't know at what age, what time this photo was taken, and I'm not sure who these 2 people are, even though some places this is labeled as his daughter Victoria when she was younger. And this is a man with a bicycle. Could it be the mailman, a farm worker? I have no idea. Trying to find some other pictures. Oh, that's about it. I think we've seen pretty much. This is labeled the Hinterkaifeck Murders, but this is not the same farmhouse, in my opinion. Or is it? Okay, maybe it is. Yeah, I see the windows up here and the roof. Okay, maybe this is the same farmhouse. So maybe this was taken a long time before the murders. Maybe this is, they're dressed a bit differently than they were in the 1900s picture. Maybe this was taken earlier in the 1900s. There's other family members. I don't know. Maybe this is Cecilia's first husband, and some of their kids are other family members. They're one of their mothers or something. I have no idea, but this is labeled the Hinterkaifeck Murders. Let's see if we get more information. Maybe some of the family members are in this picture, but I have no idea when this was taken or who all is in this picture. But we've seen this lady before in one of the other pictures, and they labeled her as Cecilia. But she's hunched over in this picture. But maybe that's not Cecilia, because we don't know what year this picture was taken. It just, a lot of the pictures just don't seem to have accurate information about. Let's see what it says. A farmer in Germany back in the 1920s had noticed mysterious footprints in the snow around his house. There was also strange stuff happening around the farm, footsteps in the attic, a newspaper that no one in the family had bought, and eventually the house keys disappeared. What makes it stranger is that the housekeeper had left a few months prior, swearing on his and everyone's life, it was a she, that the farm was haunted, kind of fishy if you ask me. The family suddenly went unseen for a couple of days, so neighbors went to check on them, only to find the entire family as well as their newly hired housekeeper murdered. Most of the family had been led into the barn one by one and slaughtered with what's believed to have been a pickaxe. The maid and their youngest son were killed in their beds. The worst part is that, well, the maid wasn't in her bed, she was lying on the floor still in her day clothes. The worst part is that the youngest daughter lived for a few hours after the attack. She spent the last few hours of her life lying next to her dead family in the hay of the barn and had torn chunks of her own hair out in that time. So I have no idea who's in this picture, but this does seem to be one of the actual crime scene photos that we've seen before. But remember, Lorenz admitted to moving two of the bodies prior to investigators getting there and taking the pictures, so if this was after he murdered, after he moved the bodies. And also, I believe that they asked him to reconstruct the crime scene. So did they move the bodies? To my understanding, that they moved the bodies back to where he had said he originally saw them and then take pictures. I have no idea. I mean, that would, you want to get the crime scene as it is when you get there. But maybe they did recreate something and then took a picture after they recreated it. Hopefully not, but back then, who knows what they did in investigations. So anyway, that's just some information about the pictures. You can't rely on the labeling of the pictures because the labelings don't make sense in some cases. My thoughts on this case are that I have no idea. um, I believe it's most likely probably Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Um, he just seems a very logical choice. He had, dealings with the family, dealings with Victoria on a personal level. They were lovers at one point. He was the father of her possible child, or could have been the father, and there's dispute over that. Now, some say that he was the father. Some say that Andreas Gruber was the father. And some say that Victoria knew Lorenz wasn't the father, but she wanted him to claim that he was, I guess, to avoid embarrassment in the community, or her father, so her father wouldn't get put back in prison for incest. I don't know. There's lots of stuff going on in that family, especially between Andreas Gruber, Victoria, and their dynamics, and what was going on to Victoria's kids, were they also being abused? At least the 7-year-old daughter. Um, so Lorenz could have had a motive. He could have gotten a fight or argument with Victoria, and it turned to that he started strangling her, and then, well, she passed out from being strangled, or he killed her, and but she also had many injuries. So could he, in a fit of rage, just started hitting her with the farm tool? After he strangled her, they were struggling. Did Lorenz show up that night to hook up with Victoria, and they hooked up in the barn. Was at their usual spot. Remember, it's a rural area. She lived with her parents in a small house. So it's the barn where they would meet up to get together. I mean, it's not like they had a Dave and Buster's there to go on a date to. Even though Lorenz had already remarried and was having kids with his new wife and had previous kids from his wife and a stepson and all that, were him and Victoria still meeting to be intimate with each other? Did they still have lots of feelings for each other? Or was he angry that Victoria had decided not to sign some papers or to sign some new papers saying that he was indeed the father and she wanted him to pay child support? How well off was he financially? He had all them kids and a new wife. Did he not want anything else to do with her or her son, whether it was his or not? Did he also not really think that it was his? And back then he couldn't prove it. If he could prove it was his, maybe he would have wanted his son to come live with him and all his other kids and his new wife. But did he honestly think that it was Andreas's child and he didn't want anything to do with the child and he didn't want anything to do with Victoria anymore? But he had no way to prove that he wasn't the father of the child. Um, this is a lot going on. I don't know exactly what the court proceedings entailed when they went to court. I just know that they said that he ended up not being a reliable witness, that Lorenz Schlittenbauer ended up not being a reliable witness. So was they saying he was lying, or that he decided he didn't really want to testify against Andreas because it upset Victoria? I don't know about that, but I think there's such drama between Andreas, Victoria, and Lorenz Schlittenbauer that Lorenz Schlittenbauer could have very well ended up murdering Victoria. Like, he came over to meet with her, they got into an argument, and he killed her. And then he killed the rest of the family simply because they had seen him there and they would know it was him and could identify him. So he had to kill the rest of the family and the maid, because the maid saw him too, the new maid. And he killed the baby Joseph. Baby Joseph was able to talk at the time and could say daddy, or, well, I don't know. I guess Joseph, I don't know if Joseph called him daddy or he called Andreas daddy, grandpa, whatever. I don't know what's going on. I imagine he didn't call Andreas daddy because that would, they wouldn't want the community to know that Andreas was the father. And Andreas's wife probably wouldn't like that. But if, she obviously knew that her husband was having an incestuous relationship with her daughter because they had both been in prison for it. Um, so could it be that Joseph was killed because maybe he was verbal and could identify who the killer was? Because he would know Lorenz. Lorenz had, been around his mama and been around the farm, been around the family, so he would know him. At one time, Lorenz did, admit to, and even after the family was murdered, Lorenz, stated that he was the father of Joseph. Um, so did he kill Joseph just because he could identify him as the person being at the house and they would know that he was the murderer? Or did he kill Joseph just because he didn't want to have to pay any child support? He didn't want to have anything to do with him. So even though Victoria was dead and the family was dead, did he not want to have to fool with custody of him himself? He didn't want to be responsible in any way for him, as far as taking him to his house to raise or financially supporting him in any way. He just wanted him gone. And also, could it be that he really didn't know whether that was his son or not, and he was angry about thinking that it could be Andreas's child and not his? Or was he angry? He thought it was his child, but he was angry that Victoria had a relationship with her father. I mean, and wouldn't marry him at one time. He wanted to marry her. Why she wouldn't leave her family and come with him? Did he want her to do that? I don't know. I haven't seen all those details. But so Lorenz Schlittenbauer makes a good suspect in my eye. And the fact that he found the bodies, a lot of times in crimes, the murderer will be the one who finds the bodies because then they can, especially now with DNA, because then they can say, well, yeah, my DNA's there because I discovered the bodies and I tried to help, or I touched the person to see if they were still breathing, or I did CPR and blah, blah, blah. So even back then they didn't have DNA. Could he have wanted to be the one to discover, or he had to be the one to discover the bodies because people kept coming by and saying, hey, we haven't seen the family in a while. You know, since you're their neighbor, you know them. Can you go check on them? Because remember, the townspeople, probably thought he was the father of Joseph. That's what they believed. So, go check on your family, go check on your son. And so he had to go check on him because people kept asking him, hey, have you seen the family? Where are they? So he had to be the one to discover them. So then, and he moved the bodies possibly to contaminate the crime scene to make it look different, but also him moving the bodies could be saying that he wasn't the murderer, that he was so shocked at finding them dead, and he moved the bodies to see who all was there in the pile of bodies and to see if anybody was still alive. Or did he move the bodies to check to see if anybody could have possibly survived? Mainly the little girl. Did he think she might still be breathing? Did he see something? If he was the murderer, he had stayed in the home for a while doing stuff. Did he know that one of them took longer to die than the others? Or, maybe they all weren't dead. They were unconscious, but they weren't all dead. And so when he came upon the bodies, he moved them to make sure they were dead before everybody else got there. Um, but there's no reason for him to be so vicious, to have hatred toward the little girl, unless just because she was Victoria's child, or he believed her also to be the product of an incestuous relationship with Andreas. So he just hated the whole family and just angry at that time and murdered them all. But also, a theory I have, which sounds plausible to me, is that it was not one of uh, the immediate neighbors or family members, but maybe a former farmhand or one of them other suspects. There were several sets of brothers who they thought could be suspects. Could they have come back to rob them and it just didn't go well because they got discovered and so they ended up killing them? That wasn't their purpose of being there, but they ended up killing them. And people say, well, why didn't they take all the money and stuff? Maybe they didn't find all the money. Maybe they didn't know how well off they were, whoever committed the crime. Maybe they found some paper money and that was good enough for them. They found the paper money in Victoria's wallet, for example, and maybe some other paper money laying around, or they found other hiding places. Maybe in where the weapon was, maybe there's money up there that in gold and or silver that Andreas had hidden up there over the years, and they found that, and they thought they had it all. They had enough. And so when the coast was clear, then they snuck away from the farm and traveled on to wherever. So, you know, but I do agree it probably had to be somebody familiar with the family and the farm and the community, but not necessarily, because a lot of transients commit murders randomly. And people say, well, it had to be somebody they knew, but not necessarily, because they could just get lucky, or it's not that hard to say, oh, that home has an attic, let me go hide up here, get out of the cold weather and the snow, and then when the coast is clear, I'll leave. So it could be in transient, just one or two transients who got discovered, and they ended up killing them. Maybe the person who did the killings in the barn was not the person who killed Maria and Joseph in the house. if there were two people, as you know, they think that two people are laying in the hay up there, did two people, like one go into the home to kill them, and then one kill the ones in the barns? Two separate murderers killing different sets of people. Or also, could the hay in the hayloft or the attic have that they thought were two people slept? Could it have just been a hay bed made for two people to be intimate with each other? Could Victoria and Lorenz had gone up there? Could the pervert daddy had been up there with Victoria? Is that where they went to do, have their incestuous relationship? Could that, the two hay pals not mean anything, that there's just one murderer, and that the hay pals were not beds as they thought, or whatever. The hay was just, or could the hay have been used to soften the footsteps so somebody could creep around up there, but it's still just one person? What made them think there's two people? I don't have any crime photos to see what makes them think two people slept on the hay up there rather than one. Could just be two different beds. Maybe the same person used one pile of hay and then a different pile of hay. Is trying to, he slept wherever he could be closest to wherever, or to lay down and, to be on guard if he was looking at the family's comings and goings, see who was around, looking out different windows up there or different areas, or looking down, like they said tiles had been removed from the ceiling area so that you could see down into the barn. So my best guess is that it was one murderer. My best suspect is Lorenz, Victoria's former lover, and their neighbor. But I also, very much think that it could very well have been just somebody wanting to rob them, somebody they possibly knew prior who had worked on the farm, or some other distant family member or neighbor, or the adult son of a neighbor who knew that they had money and just, and they would hide up there. Remember the footprints in the snow that Andreas said he saw leading to the home, but not walking away? So somebody hiding somewhere that he could not find. He didn't find them. They're very lucky. Maybe he didn't look in the right spot. Maybe they were hidden under hay so well, or they were in some other, like they saw him coming, so when he came to one part of the house, they hid in another part of the house. They could go from the attic to the living quarters to other, the barn and stuff. Could they have access to any part of the building to hide somewhere? Hide behind the animals, in the stall or something. So, very well could have just been a random criminal, or someone that they knew who used to work for them, who did know more about the layout of the house and the comings and goings of the family and stuff. So I just don't know. I can't really have a clear theory because there's so many questions I haven't been able to find answers to about this case. But I think ultimately, from my research, the main suspect that people have, and maybe the police had, but they didn't have enough evidence or desire to maybe want to prosecute him, was Lorenz Schlittenbauer. He had motive just because if he was the father of Joseph, custody battles, custody, fighting over child support and stuff, even to this day, is, that causes a lot of murders and crimes. So could that have been what happened back then? And plus the whole family situation with Andreas Gruber and his daughter Victoria was just a mess. Lorenz had just been so outraged either by their behavior or Victoria's behavior, or her trying to get him to pay child support or something. He had documents in his home that burned up in a fire, supposedly, that said that agreeing that she would not seek child support, if I understood correctly. So, but maybe she had changed her mind or had threatened to go to court with him again or something. Don't know how the German court system, the laws worked back then regarding child support and stuff. But apparently he agreed after the deaths that he was the father of Joseph, or said he was. But maybe he really didn't. Maybe he didn't think he was, but he didn't tell people that because he didn't want them to think that he had a motive for murder. Maybe they would have thought he did murder Victoria if he found out that that child wasn't his, that it was actually her father's child. But who knows what he really thought or what he really knew. Did Andreas know that that child was his, or did he think it was Lorenz's child? Or did they both think it was somebody else's child? Victoria have other lovers. So it just, I think my ultimate theory is that Lorenz did it. But like I said, I can also envision somebody, because who, well, let me change that. If Lorenz didn't have a newspaper from Munich, if he isn't the one who left it there when he was creeping around one day and hiding around, maybe wanting to see what was going on between Andreas and Victoria, maybe Lorenz was the type of person he wanted to murder his son Joseph so he wouldn't ever have to financially be involved with him. Was his goal just to one day murder Joseph, but he ended up having to murder the whole family because he got found out that he was hiding somewhere in the home. But I think whoever left the newspaper there, the Munich newspaper that nobody in the family or the mailman recognized and nobody knew where it came from, I think whoever left the newspaper there, whoever did the footprints leading up to the house in the snow, whoever, if the noises that people were hearing in the house were real, whoever made them noises was the murderer. I believe those things did happen. I don't think Andreas and Victoria lied about those things. Of course, the accounts came years later from the shopkeepers or whatever in town. I mean, we don't know if all the information given about this case is accurate. But if all that information is true, that there were noises coming from the attic weeks or months before this happened, and footprints that they couldn't account for, and newspapers that they couldn't account for, and other stuff going on, then it, there probably was somebody creeping around there, hiding out there for whatever reason. And it could have been Lorenz. Was he unaccounted for a lot from his home? Was he where he was supposed to be with his wife and children? Did she think he was working on the farm out in the field, working on the farm, his farm somewhere, and he was actually creeping around his neighbor's farm for whatever reason? If he was hiding in the attic, he just wanted to hear what they were talking about, or he wanted to see what was going on between Andreas and Victoria? As far as the 7-year-old, some people thinking that she was the intended victim. Well, I don't necessarily believe there's enough proof to say that she was assaulted or that somebody attempted to assault her, but I mean, they murdered her obviously, but they the description I read was she was wearing a long shirt. So I guess that's all that she was wearing. But couldn't she had just been getting ready for bed or going to the restroom or and hadn't put on underwear? Maybe she didn't have underwear. Maybe she didn't sleep in underwear. And she was 7 years old. It's just because she's in her shirt in the struggle and her being slaughtered, that could have been when her shirt slid up, if it was up when they found the bodies. I mean, the crime scene photo I seen, it didn't look like a 7-year-old, but if that was her, she had on shoes and socks. And her shirt was, of course, covered. Of course, they could have moved in the clothing too, like they moved the bodies. But she wasn't uncovered if that was her. If that was her mother, then that, that photo doesn't mean anything anyway. But so I don't think there's proof that she was the intended target. I don't believe there's because I don't believe there's proof that she was assaulted. At least not at that time. I'm not saying she wasn't abused by Andreas. If Andreas abused his other kids and Victoria, I'm sure she was abused by him or would be in the future if he hadn't already. Um, so, yes, can the theory that Andreas killed the family and then somebody killed him? Well, of course, that's easy to think, yeah, that's what happened because he was such a bad person that you think, well, yeah, he slaughtered his family. But if he had been going along without too many consequences or repercussions for his actions that long, why would he all of a sudden feel the need to murder his family? Unless something drastic changed, like Victoria finally said, okay, I'm leaving. I'm leaving this farm. There were reports by on some websites about this case, some videos that she took out money from her bank, closed some of her accounts. Was she closing out her accounts so that she could take the cash and move away, far away? Lorenz had already married somebody else. So why was she taking her money out of the bank? And why, if it's true that she did, why did she give 700 to the church? If that is true, if she did that, could she have been, I don't know, knowing something was coming up? Like, surely she couldn't know that she was going to be murdered, so she would have to be having money to put away to run away? Or did she just decide to take her money out of the bank? Andreas didn't want her having her own accounts or something. If obviously he was very controlling, but she did attend church, and it seemed maybe she had some friends and stuff. Was she, did she have another lover that we don't know about, or some friends who were going to help her out, and she ended up being murdered because Andreas didn't want her to leave? But here again, how did his body get covered up with the door slash piece of big wood thing and covered with hay? Unless it wasn't. But Lorenz, because Lorenz did move the body, so he moved that, and there's two witnesses with him who saw him move that. So how could Andreas kill his family and then kill himself? Or why would someone, after Andreas killed his family, why would they then kill him? Why would and then cover his body? When they just call authorities, say, I saw him killing his family, so I killed him in self-defense. He came at me. Or why did, why would they cover up his body? And so it doesn't make sense to me that Andreas was the murderer of his family. Lorenz makes sense to me, and some other third party that we don't know. Possibly one of the people listed as a suspect in this case. One of the sets of brothers mentioned as suspects, or one of the brothers. Um, so I just can't say who my main what my main theory of this case is. I guess my top suspect though is Lorenz. Then my second would be some third party that worked on the farm or knew of the house, a little bit about the family or the house, and hid at the house for whatever reason. Maybe he didn't have a place to go and it was cold. Remember, times were tough for a lot of people during this time period. It's between World War I and World War II. It's you know 1922 wasn't too long after the First World War ended. Just could be a transient going through. So my best guess is Lorenz, and my second best guess is somebody who knew of the farm and knew of the area and actually hid out at the farm and wasn't planning on murdering the family, but ended up murdering them because maybe he got caught. And my third best guess is the person did intend to murder the family, and so he just waited till he felt the need, or I mean the mood. He just waited until he was in the mood and could figure out how to get them one by one, and then just slaughtered the family for the heck of it. Just a serial killer who murders for fun or for makes him feel powerful. He didn't really have a reason to need or want to kill the family like Lorenz might have, and he really wasn't in it for the money. So that's maybe why he didn't tear up the whole house finding all the money. But like I said, we don't know exactly how much money was hidden in that house and where all the hiding places were. And so maybe the murderer didn't know either and didn't, just miss some places. Maybe he found plenty of other money that he was happy with. If he hid the murder weapon in that place in the attic, maybe there was money hidden there. And he had already found it, and so he was good to go. He didn't need to go finding money in the rest of the house or searching through the cupboards and looking up under everything. He didn't think to, and he already had enough money. He wasn't concerned with needing any more money. He just was concerned at waiting until the coast was clear so he could get out of there with what he already had. So that's my best guesses on this case. So that's all I could come up with. I can't really think of anything other, different from what everybody else has already come up with. But if, let me know your thoughts and theories on this case, and if you have some totally different idea than what I think, or how it went down, or even if you have the same suspects in mind, how do you think it went down? How do you think what? How do you think they knew where to hide the weapon? And why did they not find the weapon until they demolished the building? Did somebody put the weapon there at a later time? Like Lorenz, did he come back to the farmhouse and put the weapons there, but they were hidden in a field somewhere because they had blood and hair on them or something, and so he hid them in a field, and then for whatever reason he put them back in the home. I can't. Maybe he just had to get rid of them. He couldn't, bury them on his farm afraid that they would be found, so he wanted to put them back there so they would think the murderer just left them in the house. Because if he buried them or hid them on his farm, somebody would see him or somebody would find them, and then he did it. So I don't know, but that's the best I can come up with, and that is the end of my series on the Hinterkaifeck murders. Unless I find some new information, or somebody gives me some information, or some websites that have some different information, or help clarify some things for me. That's all I have on this case.